Scheherazade Stories. Tonight's story is about watching and being watched. The file arrived without a request. That was the first thing that bothered me. It was waiting on my desk when I came in that morning. Thin, beige, unmarked except for a handwritten number in the corner. 90921. No case title, no department stamp, no intake form. Just a file that assumed it belonged to me. I checked my inbox. Nothing. Checked the assignment board. Nothing there either. Who dropped this? I asked the room. No one looked up. That was the second thing that bothered me. I opened the file. Inside was a single incident report. Name, Thomas Reed. Age, 51. Status, missing. Last seen, 0718 a.m. Location, Central Records Building. No witness statements, no officer notes, no follow-up. Just one photo clipped to the page. Thomas Reed stood in front of a filing cabinet, holding a cardboard box. He looked tired, distracted, like someone interrupted halfway through quitting. The timestamp on the photo read 0719 a.m., 1 minute after he was last seen. That made no sense. I flipped the page. There was nothing else except a sticky note attached to the back cover. You don't remember asking. That's normal. My stomach tightened. I stood and walked to Central Records. The building was a concrete slab everyone forgot about until they needed proof something had existed. No windows on the lower floors, fluorescent lights that buzzed like they resented being turned on. At the front desk, I asked for Thomas Reed. The clerk typed, paused, then frowned. She said, "There's no employee by that name." I replied, "He worked here. I have a report." She leans closer to the screen. "No," she said slowly, "there was a Thomas Reed, but his record was archived." "When?" I asked. She checked again. "This morning." My pulse quickened. I said, "Archived isn't missing. It means someone moved him." She didn't answer. She just slid a visitor badge across the counter. Basement access only. That was the third thing that bothered me. The basement was colder, quieter. Rows of shelves stretched into the distance, packed with boxes labeled in careful handwriting. I found Thomas Reed's name quickly. The box was empty, except for one item, a yellow legal pad folded in half. Inside were dates, hundreds of them, each followed by the same 2 words, file requested, except the last entry, today's date, and a different note, pressed hard into the paper, file delivered. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. You shouldn't have opened it. I looked around. The basement lights flickered. Somewhere above me, a filing cabinet slammed shut. And suddenly, I understood the truth that made my hands shake. Thomas Reed wasn't missing. He'd been processed. And the file on my desk wasn't a report. It was a receipt. I left the basement without the legal pad. That was deliberate. Anything I carried out of that room would be logged somewhere, even if I never saw the log. Instead, I memorized the last page, the dates, the handwriting, the pressure on the paper where the words changed. File requested, file requested, file requested, file delivered. Someone had stopped asking. Someone had received. Back upstairs, Central Records looked the same as it always had. Beige walls, tired faces, the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever happened because drama required witnesses. At my desk, the file was still there, but it was thicker now. That made my chest tighten. I opened it carefully. New pages had been added, interview summaries, access logs, internal memos stamped resolved, all dated today, all referencing Thomas Reed as if he'd been processed hours ago. One memo caught my eye. Transfer complete. Subject no longer required to recall requests. Recall, not presence, not location. Recall. My phone buzzed again. Same number. You're creating duplicates. I typed back. Of what? The reply came instantly. Of attention. I stood and went looking for the department code on the memos. There wasn't one. Just a symbol in the corner. A small square with a diagonal line through it. Not a logo, not an initial. A mark. I found it again on an old case from 3 years ago, and financial audit that had quietly dissolved when its lead investigator retired early and moved abroad without telling anyone. Then again, a missing person report filed by a clerk who later transferred departments and claimed not to remember filing it. Then again, a pattern. I took the elevator down to Archives B, a section no one liked because it predated digital indexing. Paper, dust, history that couldn't be searched, only stumbled upon. That's where I found the door. No number, no label, just a handle that looked newer than everything around it. I tested it. Unlocked. Inside was a narrow office, 2 desks, a filing cabinet, a wall clock ticking too loudly. A man sat at one of the desks, reading. He looked up and smiled like he'd been expecting me. "You're early," he said. "For what?" I asked. "For forgetting," he replied. My stomach dropped. "Who are you?" I asked. "Custodian," he said. "We make sure requests reach the right place." "I never requested Thomas Reed's file," I said. He nodded. "No one ever does, consciously." I stepped inside despite myself. "Then why was it delivered to me?" I asked. "Because you noticed the gap," he said, "and gaps attract files." I looked around the room. Stacks of folders filled the shelves, all unmarked, all thin. "How many?" I asked quietly. He followed my gaze. "As many as needed, until the system stabilizes." "And what happens to the people in them?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. "They stop asking," he said. I leaned forward. Thomas Reed was processed because he kept track of requests. "Yes," the custodian agreed. "Memory is inefficient." The clock ticked louder. "And now?" I asked. "Now," he said gently, "you're creating redundancy." My phone vibrated violently. Status update available. I didn't open it. The custodian stood. "You should leave before your file finishes forming." I backed towards the door. "What happens if it does?" I asked. He smiled, not unkindly. "Then you'll finally understand why you don't remember asking." I left the room and didn't look back. At my desk, the file had changed again. A new sticky note lay on top. "Do not request your own file." My name was handwritten beneath it. I didn't go home. That was instinct, not bravery. When a system starts writing your name down, The worst thing you can do is follow routine. Routine is how it predicts you. Instead, I went back to Archives B. The hallway was darker now, fewer lights on, fewer people pretending to work late. The building felt like it was exhaling, settling into the version of itself it preferred when no one paid attention. The unmarked door was still there, unlocked. Inside, the custodian's chair was empty. The wall clock ticked. Too loud, too precise. I went straight to the filing cabinet. Drawers slid out smoothly, well-oiled, like they were meant to be opened often. Inside, rows of thin folders. No names, just numbers. The same handwritten style as the file that appeared on my desk. I pulled one at random. Inside was a photo. A woman, mid-20s, holding a stack of forms, smiling at someone off camera, alive in the way paperwork rarely captures. The report beneath it was brief. Status, resolved. Action, recall minimized. Outcome, subject no longer requests files. No mention of where she went. No mention of when. Just resolution. I reached for another folder. This one was thicker. Inside, pages were torn, notes crossed out, corrections written over corrections. At the top, in red ink, process failed. My pulse jumped. I flipped through it quickly. The subject's name was Evan Miles, former data analyst, municipal IT, terminated 2 years ago. But I remembered that name because Evan Miles had testified once, briefly, nervously, in a procurement fraud case that had collapsed a week later when his testimony was deemed unreliable. He hadn't vanished. He'd broken the process. I checked the address in the file. Still active. I closed the cabinet carefully, slid the drawer back in place, and left before the building noticed how long I'd been there. Evan Miles lived in a part of the city that had learned how to look uninteresting. Small apartments, no cameras worth stealing, no reason to linger. He opened the door after the second knock. His eyes widened. "They found me?" he asked immediately. "No," I said. "I did." That didn't calm him. Inside, his apartment was chaotic in a way that felt defensive. Notes taped to walls, files stacked in corners, a whiteboard covered in arrows that looped back on themselves. "They tried," he said, pacing. "They tried to make me forget." "Who?" I asked. He stopped and looked at me like the question itself was dangerous. "The file people," he said. "The ones who make sure nothing stays unresolved." I sat slowly. "Why didn't it work on you?" I asked. He laughed, sharp and humorless. "Because I don't resolve." I frowned. "They need closure," he continued. "They push you until you accept a version of reality that fits their records. But I kept copies, external backups, mirrors." He pointed to the walls. "They erased my access, my job, my credibility, but they couldn't erase the fact that I remembered asking." "What did you ask for?" I said. His expression darkened. "A file," he said, "one that logs who requests files." I felt cold. "They didn't like recursion," he added. My phone buzzed. "File duplication detected." Evan's eyes snapped to it. "They know you're here," he said. "You have one forming, don't you?" I didn't answer. He didn't need me to. "You're running out of time," he said. "Once your file completes, you won't even remember why you're afraid." "How do I stop it?" I asked. He hesitated. "You don't," he said. "You interrupt it." "By doing what?" I asked. He handed me a flash drive. "By stealing your own file," he said, "before they finish writing it." Outside, sirens wailed somewhere far away. Not coming closer, just noise. The kind that tells you the city is still pretending nothing is happening. Evan met my eyes. "If you fail," he said, "you won't disappear." "What happens instead?" I asked. "You'll stay and stop asking why." My phone buzzed again. This time, the message was different. File and final review. And suddenly, I understood the real danger. The system didn't erase people. It preserved them as answers. The building was quieter than it should have been. That was the first sign something had already adjusted. Central records after midnight usually hummed with low-level noise, ventilation, distant footsteps, the soft protest of old lights. Tonight, it felt padded, as if sound itself had been filed away. Evan had insisted on coming with me. "They'll expect you alone," he said. "They won't expect redundancy." We entered through a side door he still had access to. Barely. Long enough, he'd said. That was how everything worked here. Long enough to finish what needed finishing. Archives B greeted us, with dim lights and the same unmarked door. Except this time, it was open. Inside, the custodian waited. He stood beside the desk, hands folded, posture calm. The clock on the wall had stopped ticking. "You shouldn't be here," he said gently. "Your file is almost complete." I felt it then, the pressure behind my eyes, the subtle erosion of urgency, the part of my mind that wanted to sit down, to let the explanation wash over me. I fought it. "I'm here to request a file," I said. The custodian tilted his head. "You already did." "Yes, but this time I'm requesting mine." Evan sucked in a breath. "That's not permitted," the custodian said. "Self-reference destabilizes." "I know," I cut in. "That's why you're still standing here instead of finishing it." Silence. The custodian studied me for a long moment. "Once you see it," he said, "you won't want it back." "That's fine," I replied. "I'm not here to keep it. I'm here to interrupt it." The lights flickered. Behind the custodian, the filing cabinet slid open by itself. One drawer. Inside, a folder waited, thicker than the others. He didn't touch it. Neither did I. "Do you know what happens when files pile up unresolved?" he asked quietly. "They expose patterns," I said. "They create noise," he corrected. "Noise leads to mistrust. Mistrust collapses institutions." "Good," Evan muttered. The custodian finally smiled, not kindly this time, but with something like resignation. "You were never meant to solve anything," he said to me. "You were meant to remember how forgetting feels." I stepped forward and pulled the folder out. My name stared back at me from the first cage. Photo, timeline, behavioral notes. Subject demonstrates persistent inquiry. Risk, recursive attention. Recommendation, resolution via recall minimization. My hands shook. "See," the custodian said softly, "you're inefficient." I opened the folder anyway. Inside were moments from my life I'd forgotten asking about. Emails I never sent, requests I never logged, questions I almost asked, then didn't. They hadn't erased me. They'd been writing me. Evan leaned over my shoulder. "Now," he said. I pulled out the flash drive and plugged it into the terminal on the desk. The system protested immediately. Lights flared, screens flickered, duplication error, reference loop detected. I dragged my file into the root directory, then duplicated it. Once, twice, again. The custodian stepped back. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm creating noise," I said. The clock on the wall started ticking again, too fast. Files began sliding out of cabinets on their own, spilling onto the floor. Names, photos, incomplete stories suddenly visible all at once. The system didn't know what to finish first. That was the point. Evan pulled another drawer open. "Look!" Inside were files stamped "Requester Unknown," hundreds of them. People who'd noticed something, asked once, then stopped. The lights went out. When they came back on, the custodian was gone. So was the unmarked door. We stood in a normal archive room filled with normal boxes and nothing else. No clock, no symbol, no quiet pressure. By morning, Central Records was chaos. Files misfiled, logs corrupted, cross-references broken. An audit was announced by noon. By evening, 3 departments were pointing fingers at each other. No one mentioned Thomas Reed. No one mentioned me. That was the system protecting itself. Evan disappeared a week later. Not processed, not resolved, just gone. Sometimes I think that's what freedom looks like here. My badge still works, for now. But when I sit at my desk, there are no new files waiting for me. That's how I know something changed. Because systems like this don't stop. They adapt. And now they know something else, too. If they write your name down long enough, someone might finally come looking for the file that was never requested.